If you were someone who was interested in seeing how well the PS4 Pro is actually going to perform when it launches, this is the video for you. In this video, I'm going to take a look in depth at a PC that was built with very similar specs to that of the PS4 Pro, and we're going to see how well that PC actually performs to give us a better idea of what the PS4 Pro is actually capable of. Let's get started. So the guys over at Gamespot actually put together this PC that has comparable specs to that of the Sony PlayStation 4 Pro. Obviously, this isn't going to be a perfect experiment, that's not in the exact same chassis. The CPU isn't exactly the same and neither is the RAM, but this machine is going to be very comparable to what we'd get from a PS4 Pro. I'd like to point out before we look at the numbers here that the Jaguar cores used in the PS4 Pro are less capable than the AMD FX 8000 series that GameSpot used, and it's the main bottleneck that's hindering the Pro's FPS output. These specs are going to give us a very reasonable estimate about how the PlayStation 4 Pro is going to perform, but if anything, this PC will be just a little bit better than what the PS4 Pro actually is, so just keep that in mind. And I want to be clear, when I say a little bit, I do mean a little bit. Anyway, at last week's PlayStation press briefing, Sony made some performance claims regarding several games. Using those titles also available on the PC, GameSpot tested Sony's assertions that those games had the performance that they did on the PS4 Pro. So without further ado, let's look at the benchmarks here. So on Shadow of Mordor, GameSpot was actually able to reach 4K natively at above 30 FPS, 33.5 FPS to be exact. The performance wasn't exactly stable on Shadow of Mordor. It did dip into the 20 range for FPS, but not too shabby. Monolith Productions, the guys who make Shadow of Mordor, would probably go for maybe 1440p and stick to 60 FPS. But it can hit 4K, technically, just not necessarily above 60 FPS. On Killing Floor 2, using the game's highest graphical preset, GameSpot could hit 32.7 FPS at 2160p. Again, it's above 30 FPS, but just barely. It does dip as low as 26 FPS, and there's a chance that Tripwire might tone down the graphic fidelity to achieve a more smoother, consistent experience on the PS4 Pro. Elder Scrolls Online, not necessarily a graphically intensive game, but at 2160p, GameSpot was able to hit 49.1 average FPS with the game running on its highest graphical presets. Rise of the Tomb Raider, 33.4 FPS at 4K. Deus Ex couldn't hit above 30 FPS at 2160p. So those were some of the games that Sony made very specific assertions about that they will be able to run at 4K. Based on the numbers here, that claim really does hold true. Now, there are a lot of things to consider here, so I'm going to go through all of the reasons that this may not technically be the case. Firstly, these were only a handful of games that Sony specifically said could be able to hit 4K. For all we know, these could be the only games that could be able to hit 4K, so just keep that in mind. Another thing to consider is that there was a lot of dipping below the 20 FPS mark. Even though console companies like Sony are willing to stick with 30 FPS for their games, they're not willing to have it dip as low as 20, unless you make No Man's Sky. Sorry. They're typically not willing to go as low as 20. It's much more likely that on the PS4 Pro, at least some of these graphical settings are going to be turned down a little bit. There's going to have to be some give and take in order to get the average FPS above 30 consistently without any dips. Also, I just want to reiterate that this PC, if anything, is just a little bit more capable than the PS4 Pro will be. So just keep that in mind. Coming out of the PlayStation press briefing, there was a lot of skepticism on whether or not the PS4 Pro would actually be able to handle 4K gaming. If this PC is any indication of what the PS4 Pro might run like, then yes, it can handle these lesser taxing games at 2160p, but again, this is just a handful of games they claimed would be able to run 4K, and some of the more graphically demanding games, they're going to have to be upscaled 4K. They just can't handle that. And regardless, these games that they do say can run 4K are going to have to be scaled back in some way with the graphics settings. They're just not going to be able to get the kind of performance that a PC can get in that respect. That's basically what I wanted to talk about in this video. It's going to be interesting to see how the PS4 Pro's performance compares to what Sony is claiming the PS4 is capable of doing. Obviously, a PC to PS4 Pro comparison isn't necessarily the best, considering that the PS4 Pro has a low-level API. It's a console. It's built specifically for this gaming purpose. It may technically have a performance advantage relative to its power, but these benchmarks from GameSpot are really the best bet we have at understanding what the PS4 Pro's true performance is going to look like. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to smash that like button. It'd be amazing if we could get more than 50 likes on this video. I think that would be Actually, that wouldn't be a record, but it would still be awesome. Also, leave a comment letting me know what you think about this performance. It's always interesting to see how these console companies talk about their consoles compared to how their consoles actually perform. And finally, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you like what you see. Anyway, my name is Wumbo. I'll see you next time.